Hey, welcome to our podcast today. Ask Aaron and Ask EJ. This is Coach Eric Johnson, the brand.
And this is Coach Aaron Thigpen. Good morning, good day, you guys. EJ, riddle me this. What's
Topic today, man. Hey, training during the season, Aaron. I mean, you and I always talk about how important it is to maintain your base that you've built over the year. And when the baseball season, soccer season, track and field season, all of that stuff is happening, a lot of athletes just say, "Okay, I've trained, I'm done. That's good enough." And you and I know better as former professional athletes and still training and doing competitions that that's not true. So I think it's a good topic to talk about, a good reminder for people to understand what what's to do during the season when it's time to really maintain their base of training.
we've covered this topic before, guys, so I want to reference you to one of our prior podcasts. One was called Training Through the Season. So I guess we'll call this Training Through the Season 2. But that one was in November of 2021. So you may want to take a listen to that as well. Another one you may want to look at is your training's junk when dot dot dot. We did that one in
That
May of 2022. So a couple of brother sister podcasts to what we're doing today, and maybe expands on some of this topic and this subject. So EJ, I'm gonna let you go ahead and start it off. What's your thoughts on
yeah,
training through the season?
it's kind of funny, Aaron. It, playing when I did back in the day, um I noticed my first couple years that, and I was very young, 22, 23, training, and I trained hard during the season, but I get wiped out somewhere the last maybe month of our year, and I'd just be tired, and I'm like, God, and I never lifted, never did anything, and I just lost my base. So as I went on in my years of being a professional baseball player, I learned that I needed to really, lift, run, and do all that stuff to maintain basically not only my body structure and my strength, because it does deteriorate over the year, but my sharpness. I was sharp,
Yeah.
and I think, a lot of athletes, young athletes, don't understand that. So training during the season, it allows you to maintain not only your base of the strength, but your sharpness to execute, maybe to those. I was an infielder, so my cuts
Mhm.
and being able to get the right angle and getting my body in position and having that ability to do that was important. So the sharpness and the consistency wouldn't lead to being just average. It allowed me to be greater. It allowed me to do things more, not only persistent but more sharp. And I think that's important. So that's my first kind of comment on it, is that my sharpness and my ability to be really together in my movement patterns really helped that during that training season.
Yeah.
How was it for you, and what do you see? That's a personal thing, but what's your take on that a little bit?
Well, with track and field, it's a little bit different because you have what's called periodization, where you're actually having periods of loading and unloading, and you're doing that during the competitive season as well as the off season. And so that allows you kind of a way to replenish or refuel or restock the body so you never get down to zero. Um, but I need athletes to understand, and I use the term detraining when I talk about athletes who don't do anything during their competitive season. I always use the analogy of like putting money in the bank. If you've done things correctly, you've done an off season and you've put money in that account. Now
Okay.
the season comes and you're taking withdrawals. You're taking withdrawals on speed and strength and stamina. If you don't replenish those stores at some point, you're going to go into deficit spending. You're going to have zero, negative balance. So you have to figure out a way to to, again, replenish those sorts of athletic attributes or that base so that way you can sustain a level of performance. And again, I'm not talking about, if we were to look at it on a curve or on a graph, I'm not talking about you doing this as the season goes on.
Okay, right.
We're trying to eliminate this as the season goes on. And what we want to do is have something like this
Okay.
as the season goes on. So where you're maintaining a certain degree, or that degradation is very slight and incremental versus this. Because
Right.
once you have a curve or a graph that does looks like this, you're now talking about poor performance, injuries, and all sorts of things that spiral into not having a good season. So I think athletes need to keep in mind that importance of continuing to get some sort of training in. And of course, it's not going to look like your off-season training. You're
Right,
going to have
exactly.
more time and
Hmm.
energy to devote to it. And so it may be a little bit more, workouts may be shorter. They may be 30 minutes instead of an hour, hour and a half. They may be a little bit more focused, where maybe you're just doing a strength training session and it's not a strength training and a speed training session
Right.
together.
Hmm.
You may have to split things up a little bit where you're taking little bites each day, a couple days out of the week where you're spreading it out. So it can look a lot of different ways just based on what you need and the logistics of how you can get things done. But
Hmm.
you still have to do those things. And you also have to ask yourself, and this is what I ask kids during the high school season, especially the basketball, baseball players, is this your most important season? Because you have a lot of, with basketball and baseball and in soccer, you have a lot of different seasons. You have that summer season,
Right.
you have that winter season, you have the fall season, you have the spring season. Well, sometimes you have to just train through a season.
Right.
So if this is not one of those priority seasons, then you need to make the commitment to train through this so that you can be ready for the more important season, especially if that season is coming right after your not so important season, i.e., baseball.
Yes.
Why not train through that high school season so that you can be ready for the summer season where the majority of eyes and recruitment are going to be on you?
Yes.
So why take your foot off the gas for 3 or 4 months prior to the most important season of the year for you?
Yeah, I agree with you, Aaron. I mean, you said some earlier that I really loved bits and pieces. You know, one day I may do strength training, one day I may do sprint training, one day I might do recovery, and you're picking your spots and you're being strategic. And goes back to planning, right? Goes back to planning and understanding what season you're in. This all is relatable. And it allows you to be sharp and be able to execute when you need to execute. See a lot of players that I've seen go hard for the first 2 or 3 months of their unimportant season, so called, and then they kind of hit a lull, and then they get to their important season and they're not sharp, and then they just like fall. You said this line, it goes like this, and I see spike here and then drop down, and I'm like, man, how are you training? First thing I say is, how are you training and what are you doing on a daily basis? And I think a lot of times during their important season, they just think the game is the most important thing.
Yeah,
And for me, the game is not the most important thing. It's what you do before and after the game that allows you to function during the game.
right.
That's what I always say. So I think, understanding um, how important to train is and really having a map and a plan, like you said, is really critical. I just see too many athletes right now during this season, and I'm just going to use the high school season because I say a lot of my baseball players are in high school right now.
Mhm.
It's just like I see them drop off from training, and I go, what are you doing? They come in and they field and hit with me and we talk, and I said, what are you doing? You good here. I go, what have you been
Uh,
doing? Have you been
repeat
doing
that,
things
EJ.
that
Repeat that. You just broke up for about
okay?
10 seconds there. You said you look and then
Yeah, yeah. I said, Aaron, that the athletes look a little bit different than they did maybe a month prior to their season, and they just stopped training. I said, you got to maintain some sort of training regimen in order to be sharp. And
yeah,
I see that, and I just, warn them, don't fall down that path because it could lead to this.
right.
That's my point.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, some athletes say, well, I don't fall off or that's the thing. You're not going to feel drastic changes. Some of you might if you didn't do the proper off-season training,
Right,
but it's kind of a death by a thousand cuts because they're incremental. They're small percentage types of drops that you can't necessarily see as one big instant. For example, you might drop 3% on your speed and your reflexes. Well, now that ball that was 90 miles an hour becomes unhittable
right,
for you because you just don't have the reflexes to keep up with the speed of the game. In running, it's the same thing. In racing, it's the same thing. 3% is a huge drop.
it's
When
a
you're talking
huge,
about a 100-meter dash, 200-meter dash, you know what I'm saying? That
yeah,
that's the difference between, win, place, or show or being completely out of it. And if you're talking about successive 3% drops over the course of 3 months, well, now you're talking almost a 10% drop in your performance just over the course of a high school season. Just
right,
as, a general example. Same thing with strength. Now the ball hit doesn't go 250, it goes, 217, 222. Well,
right.
is that the difference between a single and a double? A run batted in. So it's these sorts of things that you have to understand that that's how performance drops off. I mean, we always think of performance dropping off because of an injury. Yeah, that's pretty
Right.
substantial. But no, there's just the natural drop off from just playing and competing, and putting the body through the stresses of that. And you have to figure out a way to mitigate, those effects.
Aaron, I just thought of something I think is really important. Um, I think training during the season keeps you mentally sharp also.
Oh
It
yeah,
just it allows you to say, what's my competitor doing or what's my competition doing? They're not doing it, I'm doing it. I'm ahead of the game. You used the term earlier, like putting things in,
you
putting things into the bank.
you
You're
froze up there again.
depositing little things. Yeah, depositing things in the bank,
Yeah,
extra money because you're training and your competition's not, and you're just adding on like $1 at a time, $2, three, four, $5, and you just put them in the bank, and it's just compound interest. You're
yeah.
just getting stronger, and I think mentally, because that's the point I'm making, mentally it puts you in a different state. I see a lot of athletes, Aaron, that do this, and I can tell how sharp they are mentally.
Oh yeah. Well, when I was running track at San Diego State, we always knew we were championship ready because we knew we always trained. I mean, kind of to
Hmm.
our detriment,
Yeah, I
like
get it,
old
right?
school in the sense that if you did survive the training, okay, you were ready. But knowing that, hey, we still are strong at the point when most people are at their weakest. So,
Right.
you know, if you took two curves, one stayed like this, one went down like that. Well, that area of separation got greater and greater, which enhanced our chances of becoming champions at the later part of the season.
Right.
And more
Right.
importantly, when I trained my athletes as a track and field coach, we only trained for the championship part of the season.
Hmm.
Everything else was a means to an end. So our goal was to be at our best at the championship time of year,
Right.
not at the beginning of the year. Not, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of what do you want out of the season. Everyone looks good out of the gate, but who remembers the all comers?
Yeah. Right. Everybody looks good out of the gate.
And
Right.
you're not getting your best performances at that time of the year anyway. So wouldn't you want your best performances when it counts the
Right.
most? So
You want to
anyway,
keep on, yeah, you want to keep on growing and getting better, right? I think that's the point that we're both trying to make, and especially with the mental aspect, is that you want to keep on growing and going upward rather than just being going down because you're like, okay, I started good, and then it's like, where am I going now?
yeah,
I tell my hitters this a lot. It's so funny. I said, listen, being consistent is important. You get one hit here, two the next game, you get three, and then you get two, one. You just keep building on that and don't try to stay away from the zero hits,
yeah,
the zero or the bad at bats that lead to zero hits. I said, if you're smart about what you're doing, you're mentally sharp and you're physically sharp, and they go hand in hand together
yeah,
in order for you to be efficient. So that's why I think training during the season is so critical. Is that you've already created the sharpness. Why would you let go?
right.
Why would you stop?
Yeah.
That's kind of like my take on this today, Aaron.
Well, let's end it there, but
Yeah.
I agree.
And if you have any questions about this, get a hold of us. There's different ways to to reach out to us. But this is Coach EJ. Ask Aaron and ask EJ, the brand, Eric Johnson.
Thank you. And I'd like to also ask you guys to hit the like button, hit the dislike button. Again, we got to play the algo game. We're getting more and more viewers. I appreciate that. Some of you guys are sending us some text messages and questions about subjects. Love that. Keep it up. And this is Coach Aaron the Brand. We'll see you. Or the source. I
I love it, man.
Later.
Later.